There and back again. A pocket's tale. Now, where to begin? Ah yes, concerning pockets.
No thank you! We don't need any more tech reviewers, YouTubers or social influencers!
How about cast and crew?
Gandalf! Gandalf the Gaffer!
Bilbo Savage. Oh! Social distancing must still be practiced, Bilbo, even in the Shire.
Yes, of course, sir. Do you like what I've done with the place since your last visit?
Well, it looks very modern.
Well, I shall be moving on shortly.
So you mean to go ahead with your plan then?
Yes, all the arrangements are made.
Your subscribers suspect something.
Well, of course they do. I haven't done an upload in over a week.
You will tell them, won't you?
Yes.
They deserve an update about the channel.
I'm old, Gandalf. I know I don't look it, but I feel it in my heart. Like a roll of gaffer tape spread too thin. I need a holiday from YouTube reviews, and I don't expect that I shall return. In fact, I mean not to. I'll just disappear. Poof!
What about your affiliate links?
My mind is made up. You will keep an eye on my comment section though, won't you?
2 eyes, as often as I can. Especially for trolls.
Thank you, Gandalf.
What about that 6K Pro of yours? Is that staying too?
Yes, it's in a box on the mantelpiece. No, wait, it's here. Isn't that odd? Yet, after all, why not? I mean, why shouldn't I keep it? I did all those tests.
I think you should leave the 6K Pro behind, Bilbo. Is that so hard?
Well, no. And yes. Now it comes to me, I don't feel like parting with it. It's mine.
There's no need to lose your chill, Bilbo.
Well, if I've lost my chill, it's your fault. It's mine. My pockets.
Have you heard of gear acquisition syndrome?
You want it for yourself.
Bilbo Savage! Do not take me for some cinematographer of high resolutions! I'm not trying to rob you. I'm trying to help you.
You're right, Gandalf. I must return the pocket. I don't need another cinema camera.
Well, yes, you have the C200.
It's late. The editor's long. It's time.
Bilbo. The pocket?
Yes. I think I thought of an ending for my review. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe.
And I'm sure they will.
Blackmagic Pocket 6K Pro. It seems like we've known each other forever. But in reality, it's only been a few short weeks. Hey everyone, my name is Guy Pigden. I am the Savage Filmmaker. I make feature films, web series and shorts, and I'm here to give tips and advice to indie filmmakers about how to make those things. I've spent a lot of time testing the 6K Pro over the last 3 weeks and trying to put it through its paces. I've tested it now in controlled corporate and creative environments, along with regular natural light tests. I still need to take it on months of jobs and film sets for the most comprehensive picture, but overall I feel I can provide some pretty in-depth thoughts on what you can expect should you decide to purchase it. I'm not a super technical reviewer. If you're looking for deep dives on color shifts, moire, dynamic range, and extreme stress tests, you'll need to look elsewhere. But as someone who has worked with the camera daily in a variety of shooting environments, I can definitely shed some light on the practicalities of filming with it. What's good, what's bad, and what I've discovered so far. With that out the way, who is this camera for? How does it fit in with the current equivalent cameras on the market? And what are the differences between it and the old Pocket 6K? Let's take a look at some footage. First off, what we all want to know are the actual differences between this and the old Pocket cameras, specifically the original Pocket 6K. ND filters are a godsend. You get 3 ND stops, and this gives you more flexibility in terms of your depth of field. It's easier to deal with outdoor filming, no more filters on the front of your lens that might produce color cast, and it's one less thing to think about. Allegedly, they also work as IR cut filters, which eliminates IR pollution, a long-standing problem with previous generation Pocket cameras. On this outdoors shoot, my 70-200 lens is stuck at 2.8, so I could only control my ISO and use these ND filters to get correct exposure. You can really see how much they help, and this alone removes so many headaches on set and allows you to find your exposure quickly and in turn start recording quickly. You can also more easily control your depth of field, which is sure to be a favorite for budding cinematographers. Touchscreen. The touchscreen monitor is excellent and truly negates the need for an additional monitor, which is absolutely game-changing. This, along with the ND filters, are the 2 biggest reasons to purchase the 6K Pro. It makes the whole camera more streamlined and compact. The old monitor often just ended up being a really oversized touchscreen that you never used for actual monitoring of your image. You'd control everything from it, but then you'd check another monitor to actually watch what you were filming, thus defeating its main purpose and its size. With the 6K Pro, there are no such problems, and with the added ability to tilt the screen, this is perfectly usable in all situations. In fact, by making it brighter, maybe a little sharper, maintaining the great touchscreen controls and adding tilt, there is no other camera on the market that can hold a candle to it in terms of screen size, screen brightness, and touchscreen capabilities. Blackmagic here are in a league of their own. I used the screen in bright sunlight and found it completely usable, and if you added a sun hood, it would be even better. Now again, we do need to mention some of the reports of the monitor screen having a blue tint to it. This has not been an issue for my camera, but it sounds like a serious defect that has widely been reported. Perhaps it can be fixed in a firmware update, perhaps a return will be required, but it's definitely something to look out for. I should also mention that this brightness of the built-in monitor is a double-edged sword, as you can accidentally underexpose your image misjudging based on this brightness. Working on the intro at the beginning of this video, my DOP encountered this problem and this caused some of our shots to get a little noisy. So it's something to look out for. Part of the point of doing that intro shoot was to have real-world experience shooting something more like you would on set, properly lit and properly graded to give you a sense of what can be achieved with the 6K Pro. Isaac Newcomb was the DOP and graded the shots to put the 6K Pro through its paces. It wasn't the perfect shoot, as we had to shoot as the sun went down while maintaining a sense of daylight continuity, and the grade was done very quickly straight afterward. So it was a rushed experience, but overall Isaac found the camera to be great to work with, although easy to underexpose due to that misleading brightness of the screen. The camera does shift to red in the skin tones when underexposed, a common issue with Blackmagic cameras. He did notice an increase in noise in the shadows when grading, As an owner of an Ursa Mini Pro G1, he thought he could tell that there was slightly less dynamic range and slightly worse roll-off in the highlights of the 6K Pro. So filmmakers, take those notes on board. This may visually still not be on par with Blackmagic's Ursa cameras as much as we'd like them to be. EVF. The other huge difference is the option to attach an EVF monitor to the top of the camera. This is a great feature. I do wonder, due to the size and shape of the camera, if this will feel somewhat awkward to use. But as another option, it's a welcome one, even if I personally won't be using it. I should mention that the tilt monitor on the back of the camera is so good, I wonder if it negates the need for those who might normally buy this extension. Interface. So not only does Blackmagic have the best inbuilt monitor of any of the current prosumer cameras, it also arguably has the best user interface. I've never used a camera system from Sony or Canon that is quicker or more intuitive to dial in your settings. Everything is a few button presses away, and everything is laid out in a sensible, efficient way, which takes almost no time to familiarize yourself with. While not new, this camera menu system is another big win for the Pocket 6K Pro. But this does lead to Blackmagic quirk number 1, the double LUT effect. One of my favorite things to do when filming and quick turnaround content is to bake in a LUT and shoot in ProRes. This means that the LUT is already applied to your footage in camera, and essentially what you see is what you get. If you're handing this off to people who don't color grade or don't understand log footage, baking in your LUT gives you a way to hand off that footage without the need for further adjustment. But what I noticed is that if you play back that footage with this setting on and the LUT preview also switched on, for some strange reason the camera will apply that LUT twice in playback. What you end up with is a scary situation where you play back your footage and it looks terrible, only to realize in the edit that it's the camera's monitor that is misleading you, as you are not seeing the real image, but the LUT layered over it twice. Why Blackmagic haven't fixed this confusing issue is anyone's guess, but hopefully we'll see it in a future firmware update. Ports. On the side of the camera we have all the same ports as before. Full HDMI connection, a 3.5mm microphone jack, a headphone jack, and now 2 mini XLR ports for running 2 phantom powered microphones. This is certainly a welcome addition, but it would have been nicer, I think, to just have one full-size phantom powered XLR or an SDI connection. I have never found Blackmagic's preamps to be very good, but there's further testing on this in another video. Looking at the mini XLRs, at least on my camera, they seem quite loose and very flimsy. Using the mini XLR inputs, they were quite stiff and difficult to get in. They appear cheaply made, and I feel like they would not last long after repeatedly plugging and unplugging from the jacks. Definitely a cause for concern. You can watch my XLR port test here, but I must say I was very surprised at how clean those preamps sounded. Much better than what I remember my 4K pockets being. All the audio in the Lord of the Rings segment was also recorded straight into the camera, so you can judge that audio as a barometer for what you might get out of those ports. B-RAW. Now let's talk about B-RAW. B-RAW alone is worth the price of admission for someone wanting to start filming in RAW without the cost of massive file sizes. The amount of shooting options is also unparalleled. All flavors of 6K and B-RAW are available, but 4K options are windowed, and there is a large sensor crop of 2.34. I'm told this is the only way for the RAW sensor to work, but many people would love to shoot RAW 1080, for example, if there was some way to use the full sensor readout. However, ProRes offers those lower resolutions, and the good news is there is no crop on the 6K sensor here. For most filming scenarios, ProRes is still a fantastic option and a highly usable codec. For quick turnaround work, I can see this being a lot of people's go-to. I use ProRes for YouTube content when mixing between my C200 and the 6K Pro, and for most corporate work. It's just another degree of welcome flexibility when choosing how you want to film your projects, so it's another big plus. Shooting in the cropped modes in B-RAW is also an interesting way to punch in with the camera to extend your lens's coverage, where a wide shot can be a close-up and you don't need to swap your lens, you can just shoot at 4K instead of 6K. Employing this method, your 35mm lens in 6K would become an 82mm-ish lens in 4K mode. Another great option to have for filmmakers trying to make their resources stretch further. B-RAW as a codec is a revelation. Being able to shoot 12-bit RAW images that are not terabytes in size and that can be edited easily on very modest computers is such an important thing for those who want to film in the best quality but don't want to pay for the storage and grunty computers that are needed for editing traditional RAW footage. This leads into DaVinci Resolve Studio, which you get free with the camera. This is the new version of DaVinci Resolve 17, finally out of beta, normally 500 New Zealand dollars. Another amazing deal. Resolve is stable, fast, and works beautifully with B-RAW footage, creating an almost perfect ecosystem. Yes, I think it's better than Premiere Pro. Yes, you should start using it. I've been finishing my film projects in DaVinci for years using its color grading tools, but it's now viable to make the jump exclusively to it for editing as well. And it's a transition that I hope to fully make by the end of this year. While DaVinci is not part of the camera per se, it is a consideration that you should think about, as shooting amazing high-res footage doesn't get you anywhere unless you can edit it together. And being able to do so easily, cheaply, and effectively with B-RAW paired with Resolve is almost like saving you the cost of a whole new computer and storage solution. This is where Blackmagic is saving you, the consumer, huge on its cost of ownership versus many of the competitors. It's depressing to spend all this money on a camera and then have to spend perhaps the same again on a computer good enough to edit that footage. Using B-RAW, you may not have this issue. Frame rates. In terms of frame rates, you just get your standard 24 or 25 frames per second and 50 frames per second at full resolution. In windowed crop mode, you can go up to 120 frames at lower resolutions. Personally, I find that shooting things at 50 frames per second at full 6K suits my style best, and it looks great. One of the best aspects of Blackmagic's intuitive interface is you can switch to slow motion at the press of the HFR button. This makes it so easy to get something in the moment without fiddling and navigating through a bunch of menus. Looking at the slow motion footage shooting 2.7K at 120 frames per second, it looks good. This is a very handy option to have if you like your slow motion slow. Perhaps this is an undersold aspect of the camera. 2.7K is still a great resolution for videos, so Blackmagic is really providing more value for money here. The only real problem with this mode is that you are cropping in on the sensor dramatically, so it can be hard to get far away enough from your subject if you're in a cramped environment. To give you some perspective, in this shot I'm standing at least 3 meters away from the camera, and I'm using the Sigma 10 to 20mm wide angle lens set to its widest angle of 10mm. So you're going to need a very wide lens or very wide open spaces to really make the most of this format. Looking at that footage, it does seem to be a little soft, and it was harder to find critical focus. This may well be due to the area of the sensor you are using. I do see it being a handy tool for filming sports from the sidelines or wildlife at this crop, as it will bring you much closer to the action. But the softness of the image could put people off. And let's talk about 6K. It's in the name of the camera after all. Is it really better than 4K? Can you tell the difference? Is it magic? Well, I don't know. I don't have a 6K monitor, and I don't care. I've never really subscribed to the idea that higher resolutions are better. I personally don't see much difference between the 6K and 4K footage in terms of that resolution, and I'm not really convinced that this is much more than a marketing strategy on Blackmagic's behalf. The additional sharpness in 6K, if anything, is often a negative, as it makes everything feel too crisp and digital. To my eye, 4K is still the sweet spot, especially with a Tiffin ProMist filter attached or using a vintage lens. I think as we continue to strive for higher resolutions, it seems more like a detailed computer image than a cinematic film look. Low light. I took the camera out one evening to shoot some low light footage and see how it held up. Blackmagic cameras have often had a tendency to fall apart in low light situations. I love filming with only natural or available light because it gives you a lot more freedom both in your locations and what you need to take to those locations. It lowers your filmmaking footprint, and for those of us who don't always ask for permission when location scouting, this can be a big bonus. Looking back at the footage, there's no doubt it is a little noisy, even with some denoise applied, and you do have to take advantage of Blackmagic's dual native ISO. When exposing between 400 and 1000 with my Sigma 1.8 wide open, the image was just too dark. But bumping it up to ISO 1250 gave me a great boost, and I was pleasantly surprised. It's not going to rival Sony cameras here, but it's definitely very usable in this type of environment, and that's another plus for this camera. Recording options are the same as previous pocket cameras. You can record to SD cards, a CF card, or externally using the USB-C cable and a solid-state drive. This range of options makes recording solutions some of the most affordable for this level of cinema camera. So nothing's changed here, but it's still great. More savings, more flexibility, thank you Blackmagic. My preference has always been to shoot with 1TB SSD drives, but at the highest quality 6K B-RAW settings, these may not be fast enough. In my experience, they have been incredibly reliable for anything I've shot, but I'm normally shooting RAW at 12:1. But it's not all roses, and now it's time to address some bad about the camera. One of the biggest criticisms of the original Pocket 4K and 6Ks was their shocking battery life, and, well, this is one area that sadly has only very marginally been improved. Battery is still bad. The claims of fixing the battery problem are greatly exaggerated. In fact, in my testing, the battery problem appeared to be almost exactly the same, offering perhaps 10 minutes longer with just over 50 minutes of continuous runtime. Essentially, it seems Blackmagic have changed the battery to another battery just as ill-suited. The Sony MPF570s, which are still small batteries and still can't offer much juice for a camera as demanding as the Pocket 6K Pro. So while I applaud using a very accessible and affordable battery, if you have to buy 6 to 10 to last you one day, then are you really saving any money? Why they couldn't have just used a slightly bigger Sony battery makes very little sense, but here we are. To add insult to injury, the AC power cable for plugging the Pro into mains powers is pathetically short. So unless you have a power point right underneath your camera, you're also going to need an extension cord permanently attached to it, which is another inconvenience, especially if you already got a chapped ass about how the internal batteries just ran out. To me, a professional camera needs an inbuilt battery solution that can last a minimum of 2 hours, because on a professional shoot you always film longer, and once your settings are dialed in your camera they will often remain on for many hours at a time. This is the Pocket 6K Pro's Achilles heel, as it was with the previous versions, and for Blackmagic not to properly address the biggest criticism leveled at it is very disappointing. Form factor. Apart from the poor battery life, I think the other big bone of contention about this camera is the form factor. Many people in the community were hoping for a more box-like design similar to the Red Komodo and Zcam offerings. For me, the current design is good and bad. While it's great that we get the best touchscreen monitor on any camera system, and it potentially saves us having to buy an extra monitor, there's no doubt that the shape is a little awkward. And it gets more awkward if you add the battery extension. You can see my review about that here. All that being said, having the monitor and touchscreen built right into the camera is very handy in most situations. In the end, it's really about your preference and style of shooting. Tripod in-studio users will find the shape excellent for their needs, while people doing handheld run-and-gun work may find it more frustrating. The other issue with the body is only having one 1/4-20 screw attachment on the top. No cold shoe, no other mounting points. This is definitely less convenient than one might hope for, especially if you're wanting to operate the camera in a minimalist, stripped down sort of way. Without a cage, there is no convenient way to mount microphones, SSD drives, or, well, anything. But I address mounting solutions in 2 other videos. As for the body's construction, it feels cheap, just like previous pockets. State-of-the-art carbon fiber polycarbonate they call it, but it feels like what they mean is not very durable plastic. Without a cage, I always feel worried that one day the camera is just going to fall to pieces. It does not feel strong or sturdy, and it is a concern for those of us who shoot in tough conditions and might be rough on their cameras. The word Pro comes with a certain set of expectations, and the Pocket's body does not really meet those in the same way its battery life fails to. Also, the body is quite loud. On systems like the Canon C200, when you hit record, the fans turn off for the duration of recording. On the 6K, there's just a constant hum that never really goes away. Whether this will cause audio issues for you really depends on how close your microphone is, but if you're attaching a mic to the camera, you will definitely pick up some of its noise. After extended operation for a few hours, the body started making a strange clicking sound. Maybe a minute later, that sound went back to the familiar constant hum. Should I be worried? I'm not sure, but it is a classic Blackmagic technical issue. The body of the 6K Pocket Pro is a bit like Emperor Palpatine. Fragile and frail on the outside, but within that body, unlimited power! Quality control. As much as I love Blackmagic, they do take shortcuts to save money. Those money savings are passed on to you and I, the consumer, which means that we get incredibly powerful cameras for a fraction of what other manufacturers charge. This gives power back to independent filmmakers and corporate shooters to deliver a look that was previously thought unimaginable for a sub $5,000 camera. Even a sub $10,000 camera. It's a fantastic time to be an indie filmmaker, and thanks to a company like Blackmagic and all the opportunities they provide with their gear. However, with them come certain reliability issues and camera quirks which undoes some of these good intentions. Things go wrong with cameras. That's true of many cameras, not just Blackmagic, but rock-solid reliability is often something valued above all else. Especially in high-pressure filming environments, corporate work or documentaries where there is no chance for do-overs or second takes. There have been multiple reports of wide-ranging issues with the release of this camera, which is often the case with Blackmagic cameras in general. There are absolutely quality control issues. What are often labelled as Blackmagic camera quirks are really the camera not working the way it should in crucial areas that we all depend on. Reports so far have discussed the blue tint on the monitor screen and colour shift when using the ND filters, along with just defective units which won't turn on. So should we all stop complaining because they're so cheap? Absolutely not. For a young filmmaker to find the money for a 6K Pro, it's not cheap for them. They probably sold a kidney to get it. It's still a very substantial amount of money. The last thing you want after that investment is to have your investment immediately compromised through a defect. So far, I have not had any problems, and I consider myself lucky, but I shouldn't think of myself as lucky. I should consider myself the norm. Buy a new Blackmagic design camera and you make a deal with the devil. Will you get the most powerful, best value camera on the market? Or will you get a dud version that is riddled with problems and needs to be sent back? I owned the Pocket 4K for over a year and absolutely loved the image coming out of it. But I switched to a Canon C200 for a lot of my corporate work, even though I found the Pocket 4K's image to be superior and its codecs to be much more convenient. I switched because I could not trust that the Pocket 4K was going to function as advertised 100% of the time. You can't explain to a client about Blackmagic camera quirks, you just need it to work. And this is Blackmagic camera's downfall, not just with the Pockets, but with the Ursa G1 and G2 cameras, and it seems their new flagship Ursa 12K, from what I've seen online. Quality control and reliability are two areas that Blackmagic must absolutely address if they want shooters to truly trust their products. On the flip side of this, we can't talk about this camera without talking about its incredible value proposition for filmmakers. This camera retails for $2,500 US. For that price you get 6K resolution, internal 6K 12-bit RAW, 10-bit 4K ProRes DaVinci Resolve Studio. Let's look at the Canon C70. $5,500, which cannot film RAW at all, and that can only film in 4K. It also doesn't come with DaVinci Resolve, arguably the best piece of post-production software for creators in 2021. Going to the Sony a7S III, it's $3,500, no internal RAW, no 6K recording, no ND filters. The FX3, $4,000, same options as the a7S III with the same sensor and a different body. The Sony FX6, $6,000, same recording options and sensor as the other two Sony cameras. That's more than double the price of the Pocket 6K Pro for lower specs, at least technically speaking, dynamic range set aside. Then we have the Red Komodo, which matches the 6K resolution of the Pocket 6K Pro, but is also more than double the price. And that's without buying the accessories needed to get it up and running. The only camera that can match the price to performance ratio of the 6K Pro is the Zcam S6, but that at the very least requires a monitor, and while it does record RAW internally, the Z-RAW format is a lot less friendly for most editing software. Critically, the Zcam S6 also doesn't have internal NDs or XLR ports, so while on paper the cost of each are the same, the actual cost of owning a Zcam would be considerably more. There are always going to be arguments over dynamic range, as many of the Blackmagic competitors boast more than Blackmagic's advertised 13 stops of dynamic range. I have never noticed the older Pockets lacking in this department, but I have not shot with the newer Sony and Canon cameras to compare. Briefly looking at the autofocus of the 6K Pro, it's fixed point. The camera focuses when you press the focus button. It works most of the time, it will solidly pick up focus on the item you are trying for, but at other times it will do a lot of hunting. To quickly lock onto something static, it works reasonably well, but don't expect it to hold focus if your subject moves forward or backward. I can't say if the autofocus is better or worse than previous Pockets because, as mentioned, I don't use it. Sony and Canon cameras in this tier do have very good autofocus. If you use or rely on autofocus heavily, this camera is not for you, and you need to save up some more money for one of the alternatives. But if we consider that most cinema cameras require manual focusing, and that manual focusing is a very important skill for any camera operator to be proficient in, then this is a non-issue. Autofocus is great in certain situations, but it's far from a deal breaker as long as you're aware you won't really have it going into this purchase. The 6K Pro also doesn't have in-body stabilisation, unlike some of its competitors, and this is actually something that would be a very welcome addition to the next version. If you're filming without any type of gimbal, tripod or shoulder rig, but just holding the 6K Pro body, you're going to run into issues with shaky, jittery footage. Many cinema cameras don't have this feature, but I think in the future they will, and it would make it easier to film with the 6K Pro stripped down, providing more options for faster, more flexible run and gun shooting. The bottom line is, at this point in time, there is no other camera on the market that offers this level of value for the money. And in fact, most equivalent cameras are near twice the price. This is the lowest barrier to entry for filmmakers looking to start recording in a RAW format at higher resolutions, apart from, of course, the previous generation Pockets. For the price, what the Pocket 6K Pro offers is quite frankly unbeatable. We also haven't mentioned how perfectly this camera suits being used as a B cam for something slightly higher end. Just stick it on a tripod and it's ready to go. Raw recording, beautiful color science at unnecessarily high resolutions. A wonderful companion to an Ursa Pro G2, or maybe even something like an RE. The Pocket 6K Pro would be a valuable tool in your arsenal as a small form factor camera that can get into tight filming spaces where your larger A camera cannot. So, is the Pocket 6K Pro for you? Well, if I was an indie filmmaker looking to buy a camera today, this would absolutely be my first choice. If you lean more toward corporate work or quick turnaround content, then perhaps this camera is not for you, although it could be used very effectively in that world, and I have already done several shoots like this. Anyone who has a Pocket 4K and loves it, yes, I think this is worth the upgrade. Anyone with a 6K, you must decide if ND filters and a better tilting screen are worth the cost. and that probably depends on your style of shooting. You are not paying for a better image, you're paying for additional conveniences. But the enhancements have certainly taken the 6K Pro up to another level, and it has definitely made the shooting experience much more fluid. My final thoughts? If you're willing to forgive the awful battery life, cheap housing, somewhat awkward form factor, and risk any ongoing Blackmagic reliability quirks you may encounter, you'll save an absolute boatload of cash. You'll also have a beautiful image which has never been easier to edit affordably and quickly. So roll the dice to save over twice the price, but land on a dud and your reputation is mud. If you've enjoyed this video or found it helpful, please like and subscribe, and you can let me know in the comments where you sit on the 6K Pro. Where do I stand? Will I be holding on to it after completing There and Back Again, an in-depth review? Well, as an indie filmmaker, I love to gamble. So I think the 6K Pro is going to be my go-to camera for the next few years, replacing my Canon C200 for a lot of the work I do to make some really exciting content. So far, I'm very happy with my purchase. Or should I say, my pockets. Little bit on the corner of the brand new Blackmagic Pocket 6K. Just did there. So that's bird shit. So was that. And that is one of the risks of going out and filming beautiful nature. Sometimes you're just gonna get shit on.